We all know of the recent crap show that is the Thomas reboot, so that is why I have decided to reflect on the series. That's right, I'm doing a top 10 of my favorite Thomas episodes of all time. Seasons 9 through 24 will not be on this list, as I have not watched those much to count any of the episodes of them as my personal favorites. With all that out of the way, let's get to my top 10 favorite episodes of Thomas and Friends. Number 10. Bill, Ben, and Fergus. This episode is about learning a lesson for being condescending and rude, and it does a dang good job at that. Basically, Bill and Ben are being rude to the newly introduced railway traction engine, Fergus. They constantly mock him and make rude remarks, but then, Fergus literally risks his life for the two engines, which is another lesson. Even if people are rude, you'll still need to do the right thing and help them out when they are in need. However, there are many better choices on this list. Let's continue, shall we? Number 9. Thomas, Percy, and Old Slow Coach. This episode starts off well with a beautiful shot that I might recreate in trains. Anyways, James complains about too much coastal runs and puffs off to collect his fuel tankers. Afterwards, Thomas and Percy visit the scrapyard where they notice a large, old coach named Old Slow Coach. Meanwhile, James is running cheerfully through the countryside with his tankers. It is not until later that he realizes that there's a hole in one of his tankers that soon caught on fire. So the firemen help James's incident. So far, this episode is really good with the plot. There are two major plot lines in one episode, which I think is really interesting. Anyways, when Thomas and Percy are getting a drink at the water tower, there is an emergency call because of the workman's hut getting burnt down. Thomas has the cunning idea of using the water in his and Percy's tanks. It works, but the hut is destroyed. So they have the idea of using Old Slow Coach as their hut by the seaside. In the end, everything is resolved and Coach was not scrapped. This episode is an action-packed adventure, which is why it has earned the number 9 spot on the list. Number 8. Double Teething Troubles. This episode is sadly the last appearance of Boko in the series. Certain people like Steve the Weave may argue that he is just Edward the Diesel, but I and many others disagree. Anyways, this is another Bill and Ben episode that introduces a new Diesel with no name. Most people call him Derek, who was never seen again after this episode, unless you count calling all engines. This Diesel is new and problematic, which is realistic to his basis, the BR Class 17 diesel locomotive, which you can look up. He and the twins try to do work, but Derek breaks down. This happens many times while he is in service, and the engines gossip about it, and the source of the gossip was Derek's breakdown on Gordon's Hill. Derek ended up getting sent back to the works, and Bill and Ben were sorry that they were rude to Boko. The lesson that is learned here is you shouldn't make fun of people who have problems. So anyways, this episode was always memorable to me, which is why it is at the number 8 spot. Number 7. Tenders and Turntables. The episode starts with the three big engines sulking about how they have to fetch their own coaches now that Thomas has earned his own branch line. They say, tender engines don't shunt, which causes turmoil in the shed. They also struggle to fit on the turntable as they are too long for it and the wind pushes the engines off the turntable. Gordon soon boasts to Thomas about how he is a tender engine and how it makes him the best, combined with his express work. One day, Gordon experienced the windy turntable and he couldn't turn around, so he had to go backwards for his next express train. This serves him right because he was being a big egomaniac to Thomas. Three boys and Thomas make fun of him in return. Meanwhile, James gets on the turntable and thought he could do better than Gordon. However, he ends up spinning around due to the wind, which is a really funny sight. Gordon saw the entire thing. I know that all I've been doing is describing the story, but all I can say is that it's really good and entertaining episode. The lesson here is to not tease people because karma will bite you back. That's all for Tenders and Turntables, and that's all for number 7. Number 6. Grandpuff. This is one of the most popular episodes of the whole series, and for a good reason. Grandpuff has always been one of my favorites. This episode is the introduction of the narrow gauge engines, which makes some really good episodes like Gallant Old Engine, Rock and Roll, Four Little Engines, and many more that sadly didn't make the list. The episode starts with Thomas telling a story about the engines of the Minnesota Railway. Duke, Stuart, and Falcon were their names. The episode is mostly visuals, which are beautiful to say the least. But the story gets a little darker when Duke is left at the shed for many years with this beautiful music from another amazing episode. Also, the story of Smudger was really interesting to me, and many others as well, because my videos about him get many views. Overall, this episode is good to watch when you are stressed or need to sit back and watch some good episodes after watching that abomination. So now, we are nearing number 1 as we are at number 5. Number 5. Rusty and the Boulder. This episode is also one of the most popular episodes. This was because not only it featuring narrow gauge engines, but it was also quite dramatic and intense if I may say so. Not to mention that when Boulder barely missed Percy and crashed into the sheds, it gave me a bit of goosebumps to be honest with you. The narration on both Alec Baldwin and Michael Angelos' part is spot on, especially at the end. This is an episode that I think about when I hear the words Thomas the Tank Engine. And I haven't even mentioned the music yet. The soundtrack of Season 5 was probably the best in the entire series, and it really shows here. The constant action, wonderful screenplay, and excellent scenery give this episode the number 5 spot on the list. Number 4. Toby and the Flood. This episode starts off with the same music as Rusty and the Boulder, and I think it is a good theme for this episode. Like Rusty and the Boulder and all of Season 5 now that I think about it, Toby and the Flood has a very gloomy vibe to it, which probably has to do with the music in this episode. Not only does it have Boulder's theme, but it also has a theme that I like to call the Natural Disaster theme, because this amazing theme plays when Toby is floating over the river. Anyways, this episode starts off with a very well lit set. For a low budget, this is one of the best sets on the show. The story is that there was so much rain that the dam that was keeping Toby's branch line from flooding was breaking because it had been raining for a really long time. Toby inspects it and sees that it is breaking, so he goes to warn everyone. When he goes to over the bridge, it breaks and he and his driver are stranded on a flooded river. Percy and Harold ended up saving the day, and everyone was fine in the end. You can probably tell that one of my favorite genres of episodes are the rescue episodes, and that shows with the next addition to this list. Number 3. Escape. Let's start off with the dialogue between Edward and Douglas. It is delivered really well from both George Carlin and Michael Angelos. The way Edward describes how Douglas and Trevor are similar is really well said. Anyways, it soon cuts to the other railway where Douglas was delivering the midnight goods train to. After he was finished, he heard a steam engine. It was Oliver and his brake van Toad escaping from scrap. Douglas thinks fast and couples to Oliver and sets off to the island of Sodor. The music that is playing while all this is happening is phenomenal. It is one of the best songs in the entire series. You should listen to the one from Sudrey and Afro Music. It is quite accurate. Anyways, they make it back home and Douglas soon realizes from the other engines that Sir Topham Hatt must know about the newly rescued engine and brake van. Topham overhears this and tells them that Oliver, who is a new addition to the island of Sodor, and he and Duck will have their own branch line called the Little Western by others. This episode is one of the most memorable ones, not only because of its music and story, but the visuals too, which is why it is number 3 on the list. Number 2. I know you thought this would be number 1, but there is one more that barely tops it in my opinion. The story starts when Henry's driver tells him that he is pulling an early fish train called the Flying Kipper. Henry is quite excited about this and soon heads to the harbor to get his train. When he sets off, it starts another wonderful theme, the Flying Kipper theme. Then there is a wonderful montage of many spectacular visuals. I especially like this one. I think the crew for Season 1 went all out on this episode, because no other episode in Season 1 that I know of is quite as beautiful as this one. Anyways, Henry is enjoying himself, but there is a faulty signal and the rails were quite icy. The points were jammed and they led to another line where a goods train was. This leads to the most memorable crash in all of Thomas and Friends' history. Take a look. Henry ends up going to Crew Works, which is an actual place where they build the steam locomotive that Henry was turned into, the LMS Black 5. He seems much happier, and he pulls trains so well that Gordon is jealous. Its visuals, music, and story make it the second best episode in the series. Before we get to number 1, let's get to some honorable mentions, because there are many great episodes that sadly didn't make the cut. And finally, the number 1 pick for the best Thomas episodes is Henry's Forest. This is the greatest episode of Thomas the Tank Engine in my opinion. It shows peace, destruction, and restoration in all one episode. Allow me to explain. The episode starts off with Henry enjoying the nice, refreshing peace of Kildare Forest, but then there is a huge storm that night that sadly affects the forest. While this happens, we get a taste of that sweet, sweet Season 3 and 4 music. Henry goes to the forest the next morning and is quite sad to see the forest is destroyed. Thomas and Toby noticed that when Henry was working on clearing the forest. He was quite sad. Toby goes to Sir Topham Hatt and tells him about Henry, and Sir Topham Hatt soon gives him the job of delivering some baby trees to the forest that were recently destroyed. This episode ends with everything resolved and everyone being happy. The way I see it, the lesson of this episode is that when something bad happens, most of the time, there is a way to fix it. The ending music also brings a tear to my eye every single time. Well, that's all the time I have for today. All the background music creators will be listed in the description. Make sure you like, subscribe, and hit the bell. And please comment what video I should make in the future. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.